You know, that gentle gurgling sound of water you just heard? It's the hum of a healing melody. The water flowing within us is also a part of nature, and when you feel that harmony between your body and Mother Nature, you will slowly, step by step, begin to heal. Now let's begin this episode of Why Is That? The saying, "Those who constantly preach live like butterflies," is this a fallacy? Listen to the end of this podcast to find your answer. First, let's clarify what a fallacy is. A fallacy, also known as a logical fallacy, is an error in reasoning within an argument. It's a deliberate or unintentional act where a debater uses logical flaws in their argument or deflects the discussion to end it or achieve their debating goal. Fallacies often lead to endless debates or quick, ambiguous conclusions that fail to resolve the core issue. Most fallacious arguments are often cloaked in a veneer of reason and persuasiveness. We can inadvertently encounter fallacies everywhere in our daily lives. In newspapers, on TV, in advertisements, and in the statements of celebrities and public figures. What is the specific fallacy called Tu Quoque, meaning you too? This fallacy originated in ancient Greece. An ancient Greek philosopher, one of the founders of Western philosophy, once rebuked Chillify, "You have broken your original promise. What you say contradicts your own thoughts, so you are not worthy to be my companion on the path to truth." Without a word of agreement, Chillify retorted, "You too. You don't always speak the truth either, so how are you any different from me?" In modern times, a famous example of the U-2 fallacy occurred during the Cold War. The Soviet Union used this tactic to counter criticisms of its human rights violations. The Soviet government often responded with questions like, "What about the US government?" to refute criticisms of its own actions. In these cases, the debater accuses someone of not practicing what they preach and exploits this inconsistency in behavior to discredit the opponent and dismiss their argument. The pattern of those who commit this fallacy is, Person A offers advice but doesn't live by it. Therefore, Person A's words are worthless. This is a form of informal fallacy, a variation of the ad hominem attack. This type of argument aims to negate the opponent's argument by claiming that their behavior is inconsistent with their conclusion. How can you criticize others when you haven't even done it yourself? Such remarks are intended to dig up the opponent's flaws, to point out how they are not as good as others, to make them falter and shrink from continuing the debate. However, in philosophy, a debate is a dialogue rich in reason, empathy, and logic, aiming towards the truth, not a battle where every statement is a weapon to defeat the opponent. Therefore, the truth of a statement does not depend on the speaker's personal life stories, but on the logic of the statement itself. Whether someone says something or acts on it is not entirely related to the rightness or wrongness of the moral principle they espouse. An argument should not be judged as right or wrong solely based on whether the speaker practices it. The validity of an argument must be assessed based on the true nature of the statement. Just as I don't necessarily have to be a singer or actor or take professional vocal and acting classes to judge whether a singer sings well or an actor performs poorly. We are simply commentators offering our own feedback. The U-2 fallacy is essentially a personal attack. At its core, it's used when someone lacks a logical counterargument, so they resort to targeting your spirit, making you feel offended or guilty about yourself. This not only diminishes the quality of the debate, but also causes frustration and discomfort for the person being attacked, which can, in the long run, easily harm the emotional well-being of both parties. The U-2 fallacy has been around for a very long time and persists to this day. A politician, an ordinary person like us, even children, can fall prey to this fallacy, whether accidentally or intentionally. This reflects a common societal mindset. If others do something wrong, then I can do it too without being held accountable or criticized. This shows a lack of responsibility and self-respect in some people who haven't yet understood that everyone is responsible for their own actions and cannot shirk that responsibility by comparing themselves to others' actions. So, what should we do to deal with this fallacy? Firstly, point out the irrelevance between the personal attack and the issue at hand. Tell those using this fallacy directly, "I think you're attacking me personally, but this has nothing to do with the issue we're debating." You can also continue to argue and demand that your opponent explain their fallacious personal attack. But before continuing the discussion civilly, let your opponent know that you recognize their personal attack, but you simply don't care. Secondly, we can directly address the personal attack fallacy. In some cases, a fallacy can affect the outcome of the discussion. So, frankly deny your opponent's claim and provide a reasonable explanation. Thirdly, you can simply ignore the personal attack. Instead of feeling offended or trying to explain yourself, you can disregard the attack and continue your argument. By doing this, you're showing that you and your opponent are not on the same level. The fourth way is to accept and filter feedback to improve ourselves. For example, in the story where a father advises his son not to smoke, the son's retort, "But you smoke too, why are you telling me not to?" is a fallacy. The father's smoking and his advice to his son about the harms of smoking are two independent aspects. However, to firmly strengthen his viewpoint or advice, the father should also set an example for his son. This means that when facing a "you too" fallacy, both the father and son need to reflect on themselves. The father could respond like this: "Son, I understand you feel a contradiction between my words and my actions. However, I am also trying to change. This was a mistake of my youth, and I am currently paying the price for it. Of course, I don't want you to make the same mistake and pay such a heavy price." Overall, each solution is suitable for different circumstances. Whichever you choose, the most important thing is not to let personal attacks affect your state of mind and emotions, and not to retaliate with attacks. Instead, keep the debate as objective as possible. Listening to others' feedback is not about feeling offended, but about self-reflection. Bravely admitting weaknesses if they exist, daring to change if you are truly wrong, not wavering in your resolve or opinions, and presenting arguments to counter the fallacy. The crucial thing you need to understand is that facing a personal attack fallacy means you are in a psychological battle between self-offense and self-reflection, between self-improvement and avoiding unnecessary conflicts. All right, with the arguments above, have you found your answer to the initial question? Do people who constantly preach live like butterflies, is this a fallacy? First, let me clarify that the opening line was borrowed from a viral song by Phi Fuong An simply to pique the listener's curiosity. Butterflies, of course, are innocent in the issue we are discussing, and I'm going to give you a nuanced answer. That statement is both a fallacy and not a fallacy, depending on the situation. If, in a debate, someone presents a moral viewpoint, and others immediately jump in and use this phrase to mock them without discussing the rightness or wrongness of the debated point, purely using it to divert the opponent's attention from the issue and undermine them, then it can be considered a form of Tu Quoque fallacy, the "you too" fallacy. The unfortunate thing is that this sweeping statement is gradually becoming a common catchphrase, a trend, a viral meme among netizens, and is being widely abused. However, there are also cases where you can use the phrase, "What you say sounds good, but you don't live by it," without committing any fallacy. This is when you specifically criticize the person who preaches morals as being a hypocrite, especially when they've just given moral advice, but immediately afterwards, they act contrary to their own words or fail to follow the very advice they just gave to others. For example, if "Why is that?" advises listeners to love themselves, open their hearts, avoid envy, and not take out their anger on the vulnerable, but outside the podcast, she's constantly obsessed with her weight, hates her own reflection, indulges in drama, is frequently irritable, lashes out, or cries alone after each episode, you might think, "I acknowledge your concepts and arguments, but you act contrary to them." Your argument would be more persuasive if you also practiced what you preached. In this case, you're not denying "Why is that?'s argument about living positively, but merely pointing out her hypocritical actions. Therefore, no fallacy is committed here. And when "Why is that?" hears these words, her action would be to self-reflect and change. I thought quite a lot about the topic for this podcast. In fact, I had considered it before and even did an episode where I made fun of myself because, indeed, I hadn't practiced what I preached. After that, I toned down and rephrased the title for that podcast episode, and it was named, "Why We Advise Others But Cannot Advise Ourselves, Solomon's Paradox Episode." Goodbye, everyone, and see you in the next episodes of Why Is That?